Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Steven Hour. Today we'll be reviewing another Batman 66 episode. The episode is called Instant Freeze and was the debut episode of Mr. Freeze. Now we'll get more into that character later, but of course, let's get into the actual plot of the episode. The episode begins with some kook going around causing trouble in Gotham City, such as melting and, using a flamethrower to melt the ice rink, and then causing that car to be chased by a policeman on a motorbike, in which he would then freeze the road, resulting in the policeman falling over. Realizing the road's covered in ice, we then quickly get a cutscene back to Commissioner Gordon's office, where he is stumped because it is in July. Keep in mind that I'm in Australia, and July is usually in the winter months. But I'm sure in America, that would be the, summer months, I'm sure. Realizing that the crime involved ice, the only culprit that they could think of that could be responsible for this is the criminal Mr. Freeze. And just like that, we have another villain yet again completely established, but we as the audience have never met him. As a result, when they realize that Mr. Freeze is around, they quickly call up Batman and Robin to quickly come to, police headquarters. Here we then get a cutscene to Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson of Wayne Manor, and here they are with a bunch of other people. They're having a sort of lunch with some famous baseball player, who would play a much bigger role in the second two-parter of this story. As a result, they quickly, slide down the Batpole, we get the opening credits, and they get in their Batmobile and drive all the way to the police department. Here we get a bit of an info dump with who Mr. Freeze is. Turns out Mr. Freeze used to be a crooked scientist until Batman one day had a fight with him. And the fight resulted in Batman accidentally knocking Instant Freeze on him. This resulted in his metabolism being changed to the point where he can no longer survive in a 50-degree below zero or more environment. They realize that Mr. Freeze's plan is to obviously get revenge on Batman for essentially causing him to live the way he does, something that has become a mainstay with Mr. Freeze in the show. But everyone says it was not his fault. A, it was an accident, and B, they kind of admit he kind of had it coming. But despite that, Batman feels like that, it's still his responsibility. Realizing that Mr. Freeze is... After this, of course, we then get another info dump with realizing what he's up, with what his plan would obviously be, as he needs money to obviously, stay in this cool environment. They quickly go back to the Batcave to plan a possible attack, and also inform the police department to keep them up to date with any weird things going on. Then we get a cutscene to Mr. Freeze's hideout. Now, I must say, I actually like this hideout of Mr. Freeze than anything other. Also like how they take advantage. Again, you see this, and you can always say this is 60s technology or special effects, but I like it. You see, Mr. Freeze is in this cold environment, but they use this heat sensor which comes up red for anyone else who isn't Mr. Freeze to stay in there, as it is at a very hot and warm temperature, which is good because none of them could survive Freeze being in a very cold, zero below environment. Here we find out that Mr. Freeze dumps his plan, and it's pretty much to get enough funds for his cold environment, but he also plans to get revenge on Batman by humiliating him by making him the laughingstock of Gotham City. He then tells his boys, to get the plan ready in motion. He needs 5, copycat of Mr. Freezes and 5 copycats of Batman. Already I like how this Freeze is. Unlike, all the other villains by this point in the series did something different. Riddler almost has a kind of strange split personality, and his criminal career is basically obsessed with outwitting Batman. Penguin is a elegant thief who plans the most elegant of crimes. And that's what he is. He's a master thief criminal, an elegant gentleman. The Joker is just a wild card and does whatever he does, however he feels like it, and most of his crimes are usually some of the most out there. Mr. Freeze here, his crimes are usually more low-key, and usually does, and he only pulls his crimes for his, to keep him in this Sub-Zero environment. We then get another cutscene with Batman and Robin in the Batcave, trying to find a way to, stand being in 50 degrees below zero or more, considering the fact that they're going to go up against Mr. Freeze in his environment. Here, of course, Alfred gets another dump on, saying Mr. Freeze is back in town, realizing that he's no doubt out for revenge, but none of them know what he's going to plan. Of course, we then get another cutscene where Commissioner Gordon and Chief O'Hara find out that 5 different Batmans have been spotted in 5 different parts of the city, all at the same time, and are curious, what's the problem, what's he doing in these territories? So they call up Batman, tell him everything, and Batman, of course, quickly deduces that they are all converting on the Gotham City Diamond Exchange, and realizing that Mr. Freeze is literally a cold-themed villain, he's after ice, which in the underworld, that means diamonds. Realizing that, they quickly make their way to the Diamond Exchange. Here we see Mr. Freeze and his goons pretty much robbing all the valuable diamonds in the store. He would then freeze a security guard, and of course all the copycat Batmans, Mr. Freezes, enter the building. Just as that happens, the Batmobile pulls up outside the Diamond Exchange, and Batman and Robin make their way in. As they come in, a bat fight breaks out between the copycat Mr. Freeze, Freeze's thug. The fight quickly ends with all the goons being knocked out, but Mr. Freeze and a small group of his thugs quickly make their escape. Of course, Mr. Freeze was smart enough to freeze the front hood of the Batmobile, resulting in, as soon as Batman and Robin quickly get in their car, they can't chase him. They look up in the sky and realize that a plane has gone by, leaving a message in the sky saying, "Strike one, Batman." With no other recourse, they have to find out where Freeze will strike next, realizing, of course, that he only stole the Diamond Exchange's most valuable diamonds, leaving the rest untouched. They realize that, obviously, that's his next goal, so they think of the possible places, all the newest people arriving, with possible very rare diamonds. Realizing that, they realize that he plans to next target a princess who's coming to Gotham, and of course they quickly make their way over to her penthouse. But by the time this happens, Mr. Freeze and his goons have pretty much already arrived, frozen the butler solid, essentially killing him, another person to be killed off screen in the series, and of course steal her valuable diamond. But just as this happened, Batman and Robin quickly makes their way in, which Batman finally drops his name, Dr. Shivel. Something that I don't think was introduced in the info dump at the beginning of the episode. Resulting in Mr. Freeze essentially distracting Batman and Robin by causing a small fire to the, penthouse. And, of course, Batman and Robin, as usual, put out the fire. Just as Mr. Freeze and his boys are making their way to their car, Batman and Robin plan to attack, when Mr. Freeze fires his freeze ray, resulting in freezing Batman and Robin solid. A helicopter then flies by saying, "Strike two, Batman." And Mr. Freeze, of course, saying that he wanted to tour with them a little longer, and realizing there's no point in staying to admire his handiwork, quickly get in the car, in the vehicle, and drive off. The credits, of course, saying how Batman and Robin gonna get out of this. Tune in tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel. The cast for this episode, pretty much, at least that a lot of is of importance, of course, is Batman and Robin, and Burt Ward and Dick Grayson. Here, I will admit, we get something pretty new with Batman here. Out of all the villains, he feels guilt for creating Mr. Freeze. After all, Mr. Freeze was pretty much a crooked scientist, but of course Batman kinda created him. And as a result, everything he does, Mr. Freeze does, he feels tremendous guilt. Unlike, I think by this point, he's one of the few villains that you could arguably he's more sympathetic compared to the other villains, as really, He does what he does because it's a matter of survival, and he doesn't believe he'll get the medical attention that he needs in prison. Again, we'll get more info down when we talk more about Mr. Freeze. And here, I think Burt Ward as Robin gets a better character development here too. As a Batman feels guilt for what he did, Robin reminds him it's all an accident, it wasn't his fault. The same with Chief O'Hara and Commissioner Gordon. I like how the Batman feels guilt. These three characters essentially give Batman, a bit of, not just hope, but just reminds him it was not entirely his fault. Here, Alfred is just Alfred, and of course Aunt Harriet is just Aunt Harriet. They're delightful to see on screen, of course, and that's kind of the point of their character. By this point, Alfred and Aunt Harriet don't really have much involvement, or really that with the story. Well, one character will get that, believe it or not, in the next villain, not the next episode, but the episode after, and we'll get to that when we get to those reviews. But of course, this episode is responsible for the introduction of Mr. Freeze. But this TV show did more for Mr. Freeze than I think the animated series did. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, first off, in the comics at the time, Mr. Freeze only appeared once, but was only called Mr. Zero. When the TV show came around, they pretty much adapted him to the show, changed his name, look, and pretty much gave him an origin story. Now, for those who have been, watching this review and are thinking, hold on, how come Nora's wife isn't mentioned? The wife Nora isn't mentioned. Well, see, here's the thing. That part of the character wouldn't be introduced until the early 1990s in Batman the Animated Series, where that series did a recreation of the Mr. Freeze character. Here they kind of just slightly gave him a better look, a better name, but I think they still kept very close to the origin he had at the time. A crooked scientist who got in an accident and realized he can only survive in sub-zero, degrees below zero temperatures, and as a result he then commits crimes purely to survive, as he needs all the funds he needs to live in the sub-zero environment. But here the show also introduced the idea that Batman caused his transformation. Therefore, he blames Batman for putting him in this state. George Sandy here plays him almost with a German accent, and I kind of like it. Again, so far he's one of the most sympathetic villains because honestly he doesn't want to be this way, but he's forced into it because of Batman. He has pure revenge on his mind. Also, I kind of like how he wouldn't hesitate to freeze people a lot. The accent is definitely, makes the character a little more memorable and stand out. Again, Mr. Freeze will be played by 3 actors during the show's run. George Sanders had the honor of playing the first version of the character, and to many, when you ask who was the better Mr. Freeze, you often toss up between Otto Preminger or George Sanders. And for me, if you see my top 10 Batman villains, he is in between for me, and that's kind of how I want it. Other than that, I also like how he also has like a more of a cinematic flair. I mean, when we're in his hideout, he's not wearing the suit. He's wearing, his Mr. Freeze suit, but he's wearing just a normal, regular, suit for the times. And I also like how he treats his own, subordinates. Like, in the scene where the butler tries to enter the room, and he's saying, oh, why aren't you coming in? And he's asked, well, have you got to turn on my hot path? And of course, he'll say, oh, don't cough, I'm sorry. Turns it on, he comes in. I like how he kind of treats his crew as well. You see, if you look at the others, and yeah, you see, by this point in the series, I think that the episodes started to become a bit more spectacular. Like I said, the Riddler and Penguin's introduction episodes are fine, but nothing really grand and spectacular. The Joker's debut was definitely, there. But here, this was a very spectacular and full-on out there episode. It's definitely one of my favorites of the series. And it's only going to get better with part 2 when we get to that review. Overall, Instant Freeze is an absolutely great episode. It is absolutely fantastic. And it holds historic value, as it's really where Mr. Freeze honestly got the new name, and honestly introducing a new
another villain created specifically for the series. I say this, I just like how just the grand scale of this and the villain's motivation. He wants revenge, but he wants to also humiliate him again, probably because of how he feels being trapped in this environment. And yeah, however, which version of Mr. Freeze do I prefer? Do I prefer the more modern take with the frozen wife, or do I prefer this one? I do like the modern take, but honestly, I prefer this one now. I mean, the dead wife thing, it's great, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of getting boring now. Bring in maybe when Mr. Freeze and Batman have a rivalry in the comics, as Batman is couldn't, fail to help Freeze with his wife Nora. Out of pure revenge, he then goes to make Batman and Gotham City hell for what they did to him. Anyway, like I said, this episode feels grand and spectacular, making it stand out, and honestly one of Season 1's best episodes, along with just the whole series in general. And that's my review of Instant Freeze, an absolute great and classic episode. Tune in next time when we review the two-parter, Rats Like Cheese, that's the two-parter. So until then, until the next one, tune in next time. Same Steven time, same Steven channel.